about the way things are going at the moment, we have a very dangerous situation on our hands in the Middle East. It's, oh, I don't know what the problem would be here. I mean, we've got, we've got peace between Israel and Egypt, peace between Israel and Jordan. Always the peace and security of Israel is the benchmark of whether things are going okay in the Middle East. And I said, no, an explosion, some kind of explosion is coming. And I've looked back and I've gone through that tape. I don't know what I meant. Maybe I meant political explosion. But some of my colleagues, particularly my Arab journalistic colleagues, also were saying the same thing at the time. We knew somehow something was going to happen. Back in 1993, I made a series of films called Beirut to Bosnia, and the subhead to them was How Muslims Are Coming to Hate the West. Dismissed as sensationalist in the New York Times. It was shown on the Discovery Channel. Only once, because then, of course, APAC and others attacked it, and on Channel 4 in Britain. And at one point in the film sequence, we filmed in Beirut, southern Lebanon, Israel, Palestine. Palestine still in quotes for me. In Gaza, West Bank, Egypt, Bosnia, Croatia, and Poland, because we also looked at the Holocaust in the film, Jewish Holocaust. And at one point in the film, I am in Bosnia, and I go into a village called Chela. I'm going to show you the sequence right now, or Doug will show it. If it all works all right, I don't trust technology, which is why I don't use email or the internet. I go into a village called Chela, which is a Muslim village captured by the Serbs a year earlier, when the Serbs had told me they were going to look after the mosque and the Muslims in the village. So a year later, the Independent sends me back to this village. As you see me walk into the mosque, I'll tell you now, Victoria and I found out that the actual day we walked into that mosque was September the 11th, 1993. It was 8 years before, to the moment. But when I edited this sequence to show you, you can understand why I drew in my breath when I heard what I say on the soundtrack as I walk into the bombed mosque. Can we shoot ahead and lights down the side? This is always the moment when I hold my breath. If we could have that light down at the back too, please. If we can get the light down at the back, that would be great.
How easily we reporters accepted this phrase. The Muslims who lived in these devastated homes were raped and murdered by the Serbs, not because they were ethnically different from their Serb attackers, but because the Serbs wanted the Muslims' land, and they got it. Our reports of their plunder made no difference. A year ago, the Independent sent me into Serbian Bosnia to search for a village in which Muslims still lived. I found a village called Chela. It had a pretty mosque and a friendly imam who lived in a cottage next door. The Serbs promised to protect them. Now I was going back to see them again, accompanied by two watchful Serb policemen.
I'm sure it's a mosque. I went in there before. Keep going, keep going. This is, I'm sure, yes, I remember when it's going in here before. This is the mosque. See it? Please, on what happened to this mosque? I mean, last time I was here, I walked inside of it. What happened there? Can anyone ask you?
Onda što se dogodilo za džamiju za sve?
It's
That's what the policeman would like to about. You see why I don't trust technology? I can get into a taxi and it'll stop working. Or an elevator which will stop working.
So I'm going to go on talking to you while we get the picture worked out. Maybe we're going to work out now. Can you do it? Yeah, try it again. Okay, we'll try it again. A slightly younger Bob Fisk on this film, I have to say. If we get it there. 1993, September 11th.
It's
No. Well, it worked okay, yes. So no lamp, we'll just abandon there. Basically, as I walk into the mosque, what I say is, when I see things like this, of course the mosque has been burned out and bombed out. When I see things like this, I wonder what the Muslims have in store for us. Maybe I should end each of my reports with the words, watch out. That's what I was about to say when the film cut there. And of course, I go into the house of the Imam. It's been burned out. His photographs of the family are lying on the floor. And then I go to the railway station where the people from this same village are being heaped onto trains and sent off and can't even tell me what life was like because they're weeping. In any event, it's a story which, of course, was repeated again and again in Bosnia, when we spent much of our time saying it was a civil war. But it was not. I think you might as well abandon it, actually, rather than have funny pictures come up. We kept saying it was a civil war, therefore we didn't have to be involved. And it was only when 750,000 Muslims in Bosnia were dead that we actually did eventually intervene. But let me go back to the much more powerful issue of Iraq, which is what really should be dominating our discussions today. I think it's almost impossible to report Iraq at the moment. I'm not really surprised, frankly, because the Americans are happy that we can't move around. As journalists, it has now got to a stage where, for the first time in my life, as a foreign correspondent, I'm not sure if the risk is worth the story or the story is worth the risk. And believe me, the American military like it like that, because we can't go and check that when they say 32 terrorists have been killed in this village, that there aren't a lot of women and children there too, although when the Iraqi film comes back, there often are. But the real problem, you see, is that we're now divided in between what I call hotel journalism and mouse journalism. Hotel journalism is where the reporter arrives at the airport, is helicoptered to the green zone, and goes into a hotel and uses the Baghdad dateline, but doesn't leave the hotel. He uses his mobile phone to call the Iraqi government in the green zone, or the American embassy, or the British embassy. The New York Times, for example, now lives and does occasionally travel up, but lives in a massive stockade with 4 watchtowers, guarded by young Iraqis with rifles, all of whom, by the way, have black T-shirts with New York Times written on. This is journalism today. I don't actually mind those reporters who don't leave the hotel because, frankly, you know, if you have family, your editor tells you can't, your security detail, a lot of reporters travel with armed men, we don't on the Independent, but many do, you know, what can he do? What I do object to is that the reporter does not tell the reader or the viewer or the listener that he doesn't leave the hotel, thus giving the impression it's possible to do a tour d'horizon of Baghdad and to check out stories, when in fact he doesn't do that. He might as well be in County Mayo or MIT, using his mobile phone to call in the green zone. But the alternative, you see, is what I try to do and what Patrick Coburn does and a few of the rest of us, and that's what I call mouse journalism. I'll give you an example. This has actually happened a few months ago. I was in Baghdad. 2 bombs are blown up by suicide bombers at a bus station used by Shiite Muslims. I rushed to the scene with my 2 Iraqi friends in a beat-up old black car. I jump out of the car, I get one picture of a woman burning next to a bus. I have 20 seconds interviewing an eyewitness, and then 40 or 50 Iraqis beating on the roof of my car, and so I drive away at speed. Mouse journalism. Off I go. That gives me 400 or 500 words in the paper, but is it worth the risk? Is it worth the risk? You know, we still ask ourselves, was it for oil? Strange how oil has even disappeared out of the narrative now. Now it's, will there be a civil war? If you want to really understand Iraq, you've got to read Doonesbury, by the way. I read Doonesbury in Iraq, and it's the best account of what I'm seeing around me. I don't know if you've seen the latest episodes. Bush is in the White House trying to say, well, you know, we can't use weapons of mass destruction, we can't use the links between Saddam and we can't use democracy at the moment, and we can't use things are getting better. And someone said, well, how about stop the civil war? He said, that's what it'll be. And the next scene is in the desert with all these poor soldiers dripping perspiration. It's getting very hot in Iraq. And one of them says, OK, Ben, stop the civil war, mount up. You see, that's what we're doing now. We're trying to stop a civil war. Or are we? You know, I don't believe that all the Sunni Muslims want to go around blowing up Shiite mosques, and I don't believe that the Shiites are all going around trying to burn down Sunni mosques. There has never been, ever, a civil war in Iraq. It is not a sectarian society, as those stupid maps suggest. You know, Kurds at the top, Sunnis in the middle, Shiites at the bottom. Imagine if we thought you were going to have a civil war. We'd have, you know, black areas of Washington, white areas of Baltimore. We'd have WASPs here, Catholics here, born-again Christians there. I mean, imagine the matrix in this country. But no, in Iraq and the Middle East, it's okay to say Druze, Shiites, Sunnis, Maronites, etc. We divide them up. I remember the first person who said the word civil war was the spokesman for the American occupation forces in August 2003 in the Green Zone. I remember taking notes and thinking, what? Civil war? What is this danger of civil war I've heard about? Where? Why? What for? I was interviewing a doctor who was shot dead, the brother of a doctor who was shot dead in his surgery in Baghdad, probably because he'd objected to the building of a Shiite Muslim mosque at the end of his street, probably killed by Shiites. And afterwards, I was sitting next to the brother of the doctor in the funeral feast, a very grisly affair that some of you may have even taken part in, lots and lots of overcooked meat. And sitting next to the brother of the doctor, I said, New York Times style, so will there be a civil war in Iraq? And he said, Mr. Robert, he said, you know, we're all intermarried. We're a tribal society. My wife is a Shiite. Do you want me to kill my wife, he said? This is not, you know, one of those little apocryphal stories. This is the voice of an Iraqi. He said, why do you Westerners want us to have a civil war? Are you trying to make us frightened and obedient through the fear of civil war? Someone wants a civil war in Iraq. By goodness, they do. But look at this whole story we hear that men in police uniforms take Margaret Hassan hostage, Margaret Hassan of Care, who was later brutally murdered in front of a video camera. Over and over again, we're hearing men in police uniforms kidnap X, kidnap Y, or men in military uniforms take over a police station. Are we supposed to believe that there is a warehouse in Fallujah with 8,000 police uniforms made to measure so that insurgents and suicide bombers can come along and take the uniform that fits them? No. I don't believe so for a moment. You know, back in Algeria, we had the same issue. We had what were called faux barrages, false checkpoints, manned by men in police uniforms at night. And it took me 3 months in Algeria before I realized that at some time around 6:05, the real policemen turned into insurgents. And what's happened is that the insurgents have so infiltrated the police and military in Iraq that they are totally untrustworthy force. That's why many of them are wearing hoods in front of US troops when I turn up at the scene of bomb explosions. They're there. I actually spent a day with the Iraqi police force. You can imagine what it was like going to the Interior Ministry in Baghdad and said, please, can I spend a day with your policemen? And to my horror, they said yes. And I set off, and what was very interesting about this, we had a thin-skinned car, no flak jackets, they had some Kalashnikovs and a couple of rounds. At one point, they ran out of gas, and the Independent had to buy petrol at a petrol station for their police vehicle. But what was interesting is that when we set off, they complained to me and said, please, can you get the Americans to give us better weapons? And then they talked about terrorists. By lunchtime, they were talking about mujahideen, holy warriors. By the afternoon, at around 3:30, and I began to see the clock ticking towards 6:05, they were talking about how the Americans were really getting it from the insurgents now, and the patriots were really knowing how to fight, right? So I was kind of happy at 4 o'clock when my driver turned up and said, Mr. Robert, we'll go home now. Because who knows what would have happened 2 hours later. But you see, they were, of course, if not insurgents, they were sympathizers with those Iraqis opposing the occupation. 2 were Sunnis and 1 was Shia. There you go. They weren't fighting each other. They were talking about fighting occupation. So these are questions. Look, did we go for oil? Simple answer. If the major export of Iraq was asparagus, do you believe the 82nd Airborne would be in Mosul? Or the 3rd Infantry Division in Baghdad? But there's another reason. I was south of Baghdad on the notorious Highway 8, horrible throat-cutting road where journalists have been killed, investigating the murder of a poor Red Cross driver and interviewing an Iraqi family whom I think probably saw the murderers, the gunmen. And as I was talking to them, the ground began to tremble. And up the road came the biggest military convoy I have ever seen in my life, bigger than any of the Soviet ones in Afghanistan. It took an hour and 3/4 to pass. Abrams M1, A1 tanks, Bradley fighting armoured vehicles, Humvee, truck after truck. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of troops, all with their rifles pointing out the side of the trucks like porcupine quills, Apache helicopters over the top. And I sat in the muck beside the road along with the Iraqi family and just watched them pass. And I thought, you know, 2,000 years ago, a little bit further west, I'd have been sitting somewhere in Syria and it would have been the tramp of Roman legions passing me. Because I think that a superpower has a visceral need to project military strength. The British did. The Romans did. The Romans actually almost got into the Iraqi desert when they got massacred by Parthians, who would be Syrians or Iraqis today. The Roman general Crassus, the man who defeated Spartacus at the Battle of the River Silarus in 72